was supposed to be a routine flight. On June 12, 2025, Air India Flight 171 took off from Ahmedabad bound for London, with hundreds of passengers on board and nothing out of the ordinary in sight. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner was performing flawlessly. The skies were clear, no distress calls, no warnings. And then, without explanation, less than 60 seconds after takeoff, the plane dropped from the sky. What followed was a fireball, silence, and a mystery that paralyzed the global aviation industry. At first, investigators searched for mechanical failure, bird strike, fuel contamination, but nothing made sense. That is, until the preliminary report landed, and what it revealed was beyond stunning. This wasn't about turbulence. This wasn't about the aircraft losing control. This was about something much worse. Someone had manually triggered the dual-engine shutdown, not by accident, not because of weather, but because of a switch buried inside the cockpit, moved by human hands. And when that discovery came to light, Boeing's confidence, reputation, and responsibility were shattered in a way no checklist could recover from. According to the preliminary report, everything about the takeoff was normal. The aircraft reached V1 speed, meaning there was no turning back. At 153 knots, it lifted off. At 180 knots, it was climbing. But almost instantly, something went wrong. The RAT, the ram air turbine, a device that only deploys during complete power loss, was triggered within seconds. That's not supposed to happen unless both engines fail. And fail they did. The black box confirmed what engineers feared. The engines didn't fail on their own. They were cut off. The fuel control switches, the only way to stop both engines mid-flight, were moved. 1 second apart. First left, then right. That detail matters, because it's exactly how shutdown procedures are done at the gate after a flight. Not in midair, not while climbing, and definitely not just after liftoff. Yet that's exactly what happened. The report confirmed that the aircraft entered airborne logic mode, meaning it had left the ground, and shortly after that, the fuel supply was deliberately cut off. The Dreamliner became a silent glider, and with almost no time, no altitude, and no thrust, it plummeted toward the Earth. And the world suddenly realized, this wasn't a glitch. This wasn't mechanical. It was a decision. Boeing and the airline community have long emphasized that their aircraft are designed for survivability. In the event of a dual-engine failure, there's a checklist. One of the most critical actions? Turn both fuel control switches from run to cutoff, then immediately back to run. This jumpstarts the engine relight sequence. It's designed for extremely rare situations. But here's the problem. That's not what happened on Flight 171. The switches were placed into cutoff, but they stayed there for at least 10 seconds. That's a lifetime when you're climbing at full throttle and suddenly drop to idle. According to the flight data recorder, the RAT deployed 4 seconds after the cutoff. Then came the desperate attempt to recover. The same switches were returned to run, 2 seconds apart, just like a standard shutdown reversal. Engine 1 responded. Engine 2 never recovered. By the time the relight began, the aircraft had already begun to stall. The pilot transmitted a brief, haunting, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday." That was the last thing anyone heard before the impact. Had the switches been moved back instantly, the engines might have relit in time. Had the plane been just a few hundred feet higher, there might have been lift to sustain it. But neither of those things happened. And now, investigators were left with a terrifying question. Why would someone do that? One of the most controversial claims early on was that the switches could have been jostled out of position by turbulence or vibration. But investigators were quick to shut down that theory. These are not light switches. The fuel control switches on the 787 are spring-loaded, locked into place, and require deliberate force to move. You must pull, lift, rotate, and release them past a detent, a mechanical resistance designed specifically to prevent accidental activation. An AI-assisted review of cockpit procedures and known mechanical behaviors confirmed what most pilots already knew. It's mechanically impossible for both switches to move to cutoff without direct, intentional manipulation. In fact, the pattern, left first, then right, 1 second apart, mirrored exactly the shutdown sequence pilots are trained to perform only at the gate. The AI analysis flagged the movement as patterned, and intentional, rejecting all models that included vibration, system error, or accidental touch. And this detail brought the focus not to Boeing's design, but to the people inside the cockpit. The implication wasn't just technical, it was psychological. Something had overridden decades of training, standard operating procedures, and instinct. Something or someone had made the choice to shut those engines off. Boeing has long positioned the 787 as one of the most advanced, safest aircraft in history. With layered redundancies, fail-safes, and automation designed to protect even against human error, it was meant to be indestructible, at least in theory. But Flight 171 exposed a truth that sent ripples through the aviation industry. No system, no matter how advanced, can stop a human hand from making the wrong move. In its internal response, Boeing stressed that their aircraft operated exactly as designed. The engines responded to the switch commands. The RAT deployed on cue. The relight sequence initiated properly. The aircraft did everything it was supposed to do, except save itself from a decision it was never designed to question. That admission didn't bring comfort. It brought horror, because it meant that even a flawless machine could be rendered useless by a single human input. The real mystery wasn't whether the switches were moved. That was confirmed. The question that remained was why, and no one, not Boeing, not the airline, not the families, could accept the answer that seemed to be forming. While Boeing defended the aircraft's flawless response and investigators confirmed no mechanical anomaly, the story took a darker turn when a single fact could no longer be ignored. This wasn't an accident. Both fuel control switches had been moved by someone in the cockpit, and that meant the investigation had to shift from systems and structures to the unspoken realm of psychology. The aviation board quietly brought in a team of experts, doctors in aviation medicine, specialists in pilot behavior, and a leading aviation psychologist. Why? Because when two engines shut down in sequence, in the first minute of flight, without external cause, the threat is no longer in the software or in the hardware. It's in the human mind. The fuel cutoff maneuver was not just physically deliberate, it was procedurally consistent, identical to shutdowns performed on the ground. And yet, it happened mid-air. The AI systems analyzing voice recordings noted the inflection change when one pilot asked, "Why did you cut off?" The tone was shocked, not confused, not mechanical. The response was immediate denial. But by then, it didn't matter. One of the two people in that cockpit had made a decision. The other had just seconds to react. And in those seconds, the aircraft's systems responded as designed, but had no defense against the source of the threat, one of the very people it trusted to fly. The black box recordings created a precise timeline. At 080842 UTC, Engine 1 was shut down. At 080843, Engine 2 followed. At 80852, both switches were flipped back to run. Just 10 seconds had passed, but they were the most critical 10 seconds of the flight. Within that narrow window, the RAT deployed. Systems rerouted to emergency mode. FADEC began the engine relight procedure. Engine 1 began to recover. Engine 2 stalled. By 8:09:05, a desperate Mayday call was transmitted. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. No further communication followed. The aircraft, now with asymmetrical thrust and rapidly descending, clipped the tops of buildings near the runway's edge. It never had a chance to climb to safety. The AI simulator projected a chilling alternative. Had the switches been moved back to run just 4 seconds earlier, both engines might have relit fully. There would have been just enough altitude to recover, just enough lift, just enough time. But that didn't happen. Because in those 10 seconds, the pilots weren't responding to failure. They were responding to each other. The confusion, the disbelief, the hesitation. Those were the true causes of death, and not even Boeing's most advanced aircraft could outrun them. The Dreamliner was never meant to question the captain. Its systems are designed to respond to human command with precision and speed. But that obedience, once seen as a triumph of engineering, proved fatal in the case of Flight 171. Because when the pilot's input became the problem, the aircraft had no firewall against it. There is no logic check for intent, no contradiction filter that says, "This doesn't make sense." Once the fuel control levers were moved, the command was accepted, without hesitation, without challenge. The system assumed its operator knew what they were doing, but they didn't. Or worse, they did. And the aircraft followed orders, straight into the ground. This raised an existential question for Boeing. If their aircraft functioned exactly as intended, then who takes the blame? The airline? The crew? The manufacturer? Families wanted accountability. But Boeing could only point to the one truth they couldn't erase. The machine didn't malfunction, it obeyed. In the final pages of the preliminary report, a statement appeared, quiet, understated, and yet seismic in implication. It read, "The engine shutdown procedure recorded was consistent with manual input. No system error was found." This line changed everything. It eliminated the possibility of automation failure, wiring short circuits, or fuel contamination. It confirmed what many feared but couldn't admit. A human being brought this plane down, and that conclusion did more than devastate families. It sent tremors through Boeing's legacy, because no amount of engineering can protect a system from the one thing it must always trust: the human at the controls. Boeing's clean slate in this tragedy didn't spare them from the backlash. The public couldn't accept that a nearly $300 million aircraft, guided by the world's best technology, could be brought down by a flick of two fingers. And now, as investigators brace for the release of the final report, the pressure on Boeing is no longer about the aircraft's design, but about the assumptions built into the system itself. Because if a plane can fall from the sky while doing everything right, maybe the system wasn't so perfect after all. Flight 171 wasn't lost because a bolt failed, or a bird struck the engine, or a storm caught it by surprise. It wasn't turbulence. It wasn't a technical malfunction. It wasn't even the airplane. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner, with its cutting-edge systems, its fault-tolerant engines, its redundant safety layers, worked flawlessly. Every command was followed. Every response was triggered exactly as designed. The tragedy wasn't in the failure of the machine. It was in the fact that the machine never failed at all. Both engines shut down because someone told them to, not by accident, not because the switches were flimsy, but because human hands, inside that cockpit, moved them, deliberately. And in doing so, they initiated a chain reaction that no amount of software, sensors, or automated systems could undo. The aircraft obeyed, like it always does. And that obedience, once celebrated as the pinnacle of modern engineering, became its death sentence. For Boeing, this crash wasn't just a tragedy, it was a revelation. Because the 787 didn't malfunction, but its design philosophy did. A system built on trust, on the assumption that the pilot would always act in the aircraft's best interest, was exposed as fatally naive. The Dreamliner did exactly what it was told. It simply had no way to know the order itself was the threat. And that is the part that just destroyed Boeing. Because now the world knows, perfection on paper means nothing when the danger comes from within. If this story shook you, if it made you rethink who's really in control when you board a plane, don't stay silent. Subscribe to this channel for more true investigations that reveal what others refuse to say. Hit the bell, because this won't be the last time a system fails to question its orders. Share this video with someone who still believes that automation means safety. Comment below. Should aircraft be built to challenge human commands? If those commands lead to catastrophe,